Hi, welcome. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm Charlotte Duran. I'm a producer here with KPCC in person. For those of you who are new to KPCC, we are a multi-platform organization. We're on the air at 89.3. We're online at kpcc.org, and we do lots of in-person events all around Southern California. If you want to find out more about the events that we have going on, we have quite a few coming up. Check us out at kpcc.org/in-person. And I have Ashley Alvarado here to tell you some other ways you can connect with us.
Thank you. So I am the reason that there are those little cards all over your chairs, and I hope that you will be able to take a moment today to fill them out. The reason we do that is because I should also say, so I'm the director of community engagement. Sorry, it's been a while since I've done this. And one of the best parts of my job is that I get to connect with community members. I like to say I'm a professional fangirl. I get to go out, meet folks, come back to our building and say, listen up, you need to know about what these people are doing. You need to know about their projects. And the way that I find out about some of those projects is through these forums. If you let us know how we can get in touch with you and something maybe that you know better than the next person, whether it's the part of town you live in, the kind of work you do, if you're a parent, an educator, an artist, or all of the above, all of that is helpful to us. And that's really it, so thank you.
And just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. We are live video streaming tonight, so we ask that you not video record this event, but please feel free to take photos, connect with us on social. We'll be at KPCC in person. We're using the hashtag ArtsEd. Now I'd like to introduce tonight's host, Carla Javier.
Much for joining us this evening. I'm very excited about this conversation. As you know, we're here to talk about ethnic studies and the arts. This is topical for a number of reasons. Right now, AB 2772 is being considered at the state level. It's a bill that would require ethnic studies for graduation, and as either in English or like a social science class. Meanwhile, the Department of Education here in California is also developing a model curriculum that could be used by schools around the state. And here closer to home, we have some school districts that are already beginning to run out ethnic studies. El Rancho Unified, which is a school district over in Pico Rivera, has already made ethnic studies a graduation requirement for their high schoolers. And LAUSD is working through creating materials and resources and courses for ethnic studies teachers in the district too. But just because these kind of more official ways of implementing ethnic studies are still in the works does not mean that those lessons aren't already coming to students in classrooms around Southern California. And in my experience as the arts education reporter here at KPCC, I've noticed in my reporting a lot of the lessons about identity and history and culture are actually happening in arts lessons and in arts integrated lessons. And so that's why we wanted to bring this conversation here to you to talk about today. And we have some great people here to talk about it. So I'm going to introduce them and have them come up right now. First, we're going to have Kieley Jackson, who is the Ethnic Studies Coordinator at LAUSD. Next to him, we will have Dr. Luis-Genaro Garcia. He is an art teacher actually at an LAUSD school, Jefferson High School. He's also an LAUSD alum, but we'll talk more about that later. And then next to him, we'll have Guadalupe Cardona. She is an organizer with Ethnic Studies Now and the Association of Raza Educators. She's also an ethnic studies teacher. And before we get chatting, I just want to let y'all know in the audience that we will be coming to you twice in this conversation for your input, for your questions. So make sure you think of those for when we do that. And so I guess we can just start our conversation here. I kind of want to get us on the same page talking. So what I wanted to do is ask you from your perspective, whether as, you know, at LAUSD as an administrator, as a teacher, as an advocate, how you would define an ethnic studies class and what kind of things an ethnic studies class would address. Maybe, Kieley, we can start with you.
Sure. I think it largely starts with some of the movements that came out of the San Francisco State in the late 1960s, largely looking at some of the historically marginalized groups. Here in Los Angeles, we've tried to, we understand how diverse our community is, and so we've tried to push that even further to make sure that all of our voices are represented and heard within the district. We'd like to think that it can be interdisciplinary. We think it also lives naturally a little bit in history, social science, also English language arts, but also in the arts, and we'd like to see it embedded essentially K-12 and across content.
Sure. And then Luis, I guess you are an art teacher. How do you define ethnic studies from your perspective?
Well, I would identify it as something that just happens organically in my classroom. And you mentioned earlier that I'm a graduate of the high school where I currently teach in. And one of the things that I wanted to do as an art teacher is make the learning experiences of my students relevant to their circumstances, their histories, and the communities that they live in. And so just it happened organically, where I started talking about the Central Jazz era on Central Avenue. I started talking about the history of the Black Panthers that existed in South Central on 41st and Central. And so from that, I just kind of developed my own approach to art education, not necessarily thinking about ethnic studies, but again, I kind of organically just drew on historical knowledge and cultural capital of the community that I was teaching in.
Mm-hmm. And then Guadalupe?
So just like Luis, I've been a teacher for 18 years, and so I've always incorporated, culturally relevant curriculum. Whoever's in my classroom, I'm going to make sure that they are included in the curriculum in any way possible. So before, this movement that is, ethnic studies existed, there are many of us that were doing this already in the classroom. But if I had to define it in a way that if a course today is to be called ethnic studies, I would say that it definitely should have some components of counter-narrative, some components of being critical, so that students are looking not just at the histories of peoples, the intersections of peoples, but the peoples of the historically disadvantaged groups of, Native American, of Asian and the diaspora, the Asian diaspora, African, the African diaspora, and Chicano Latino. So they should be looking at those histories, but they should also be looking at the intersections, and they should be looking at them critically, so that students don't just leave with an understanding of those histories, but they leave with an understanding of some frameworks that have existed and how to then take that knowledge to the next level, so that when they go to college and out into the world, they're able to make decisions based on what they understand to have existed to lead people up to the historically disadvantaged place that they're at, and to be able to do something about it.
And I want to stick with you for a second, because you are an advocate for ethnic studies, and I want to ask you, what has been done towards advocacy for ethnic studies, and why? Why is it so important?
Well, as Mr. Jackson mentioned, it's been going on for before I was even born. So I know a lot of it has to do with, grassroots, students themselves, their communities, their parents, educators who are frustrated, persons who wanted to become educators, going out and demanding that schools incorporate these types of curriculums in the classroom. Currently, I would say, organizations like Ethnic Studies Now, the People's Ed Movement, the Association of Raza Educators, and other such groups like that have been organizing students and parents and going to, LAUSD, going to the various districts, working with board members, working with, writing resolutions so that, community organizations can help board members get these things passed.
And Luis, I want to turn to you. Like we mentioned earlier, you are an art teacher now. You're also an alum of the district. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences as a student? I mean, did you have access to ethnic studies? Did you have access to arts education?
Right. So for those of you that are familiar with the A through G requirements, so the A through G requirements are a set of courses that set up a student to be eligible for high school graduation. And so in those A through G requirements, you have 4 years of English, I believe it's 3 or 4 years of math, but the detail within the art part is that it's only required for 1 year. And so when I was a junior in high school, I took one art class, and I'm an artist now, but as a student, right, I had the potential to develop more as an artist in this class and maybe another class, but unfortunately I was only given art for 1 year. And so coming back to my high school, I wanted to do something about that. And so one of the things that I've developed with administration is we've kind of developed this track of art courses where students can take at least 4 years of art throughout their high school academic career. And so, you start with Introduction to Art, you move on to painting, you move on to Painting 2, and then that is really preparing you to take an AP course. So, drawing from my own experiences and I would think of it that I got an art education through a banking approach, right? Which was, this is what we're gonna do, you do it, you get a grade, and that's it. So I really didn't develop any art skills. I didn't really develop any new knowledge about art history, how these art periods developed. And so one of the things that I try to do within my courses is exactly that. And so I try to show students the history of these different art periods, the style of these art periods, but not only that, connect it to their own experiences in their own neighborhood by them using their own cultural knowledge and cultural capital. And so, based on my experiences as a high school student, this is what I've done for the last 13 years. And, I've kind of developed these projects with my own students to the point where they're now drawing on tortillas, right, as a way to resist that traditional way that we think that painting should be done in canvases, right?
And we'll talk more about those tortillas in a little bit. And also, if you haven't seen them already, they're in the back. You should check them out before we're done this evening. So Kieley, as you're listening to this, you head up LAUSD's efforts to roll out ethnic studies, and you come from like a history, social science kind of background. Can you talk a little bit about, why this is something that LAUSD is taking on and how it fits into the mission and vision for your students, ethnic studies?
Without question. We really feel that we want our students to exit our system as effective consumers and producers of information, taking on multiple perspectives, being able to think critically and work through an inquiry process. So we think that that's very, very valuable. The more immediate work probably dates back to the board resolution of 2014. From that point forward, we have been moving and working with committees to have input from our entire LAUSD community. We've moved rather thoughtfully and carefully to make sure that we're doing this right and not rushing. And to that end, we have written and had approved by University of California Office of the President a ethnic studies survey course. We also rewrote course outlines for several existing courses that we had within the field of ethnic studies. And that work dates probably to the beginning of the 2016-17 school year, and we've been moving forward in that fashion. So in the last 2 years, I believe we've had just over 11,000 students enrolled in one or more of those courses.
Those like official ethnic studies
Correct.
Courses. Got it. So what I'm hearing a lot right now is about the benefits, the positives, the arguments for ethnic studies. But I'm curious what challenges there are towards implementing something like this. Kieley, you were just mentioning at the district level, like having to develop courses, getting them approved. What other challenges are you facing?
Well, frankly, there's some logistical challenges. So again, speaking from the history social science perspective, the ethnic studies survey course, for instance, that was written and submitted, and not to be too technical or wonky, but to come back to those A through G pieces, that was written as a G elective course with an A emphasis, which is history social science. So teachers, to be eligible to teach that course, need to have a social science background. So that would be one of those challenges moving forward. We also want to make sure that we have the right teachers teaching these courses, and by that I mean teachers who have been trained professionally and gone through professional development to ensure that they have a content knowledge base as well as a pedagogical approach that will best serve our students in those courses.
And then Guadalupe and Luis, too, you can chime in. One of the things that we were talking about before we walked in here were, the other parts of implementing ethnic studies, like getting parents on board or getting the, students excited about the courses. Can you talk a little bit about what that work has looked like in your experience?
Sure. So in my experience, before this school year, I have worked with parents just because, there's a lot of research that shows that true parent engagement increases tremendously the success rate of students. So in the past, we've created courses where parents come in, and it wasn't the typical, this is how you get your child to college, although that is a part of it as well. It was more like, your child has written this poem, sit down as a family, and then the children become sort of the teachers to the parents of how to write a poem. And what we always find is that the parents are very impressed by their children, and it just creates a really amazing learning opportunity and relationship building. But this current school year, since I am in a district that has the graduation requirement, and a lot of the students have been exposed to ethnic studies courses either on their campuses or through a dual credit program with Cal State Long Beach. And so a lot of the parents were kind of asking, what is this, ethnic studies, thing that my children are, taking these courses. And in addition to that, since, I've taken students to see, various plays that have been in Los Angeles this year. We had the Encuentro de las Americas at Los Angeles Theater Center, so we were very fortunate to take a lot of students to see these very ethnic studies-based sort of plays. And so parents would come along as chaperones, and they were like, this is amazing, I wish I could learn more. So then this idea was born to create a parent ethnic studies class. And I asked the parent, it was on the bus, literally, I was like, if we had a class like that, would you come? Of course we would. So, a few colleagues and we collaborated and we created this course, and it's been extremely powerful to see the parents develop their knowledge of ethnic studies, but also to see how that connects to relationship building with their children.
Yeah, and then Luis, what about getting students interested in your painting class that talks about the themes of ethnic studies?
So just to kind of make sure I have everyone, on the same page.
It's a very teacher move.
Sorry.
Right
So one of the first classes that students take with me is Introduction to Art, and so from that class, for the most part, I have 3 ninth grade classes of Introduction to Art, and so from those 3 classes is where I recruit for the next set of more advanced courses. And one of the things that I've constantly done, within the past few years, is I've communicated with parents, right? I've developed this relationship with them. I talk to them about going to the same high school, graduating from there, knowing the community. And one of the things that I constantly talk to them about is preparing their sons and daughters to go to college, right? And one of the things that I promote is my painting course, which I call, on the syllabus, it's called Painting Through Cultural Perspectives, right? And so in this course, it's a course where I've drawn on the educational approaches that I kind of developed, in my graduate study. And so I had this background in critical education. In graduate school, I developed the knowledge to use the funds of knowledge, right? The resources of knowledge that students have at home, right? And to use those in the classroom. And within that, within my program, I also brought in critical race theory, so where we question and challenge issues of race, class, and gender. And so this is what I talk to parents about. And for many students, this course is a little intimidating because I talk to them about how we're going to be exploring concepts that they're going to learn their first couple of years in college. And so the big part of that class is that I actually have students do research on their own families. And that research, they have to interview someone and really understand the process of what their families had to go through from their countries of origin to the very processes that they had to endure to get to the U.S. And so I'll cap it right there, because that really becomes, right, the foundation to the rest of the course.
Yeah, and you're an art teacher. Kieley, look at your website.
I just wanted to chime in. It's such a perfect fit, even cross-content into history, social science. One of the things that we recommend to our teachers, one of the sort of before getting into the main content of a given course, is to give students an opportunity to do a lesson we call snapshot autobiography, where they ask questions of their mother, their father, their uncle, their aunt, their brothers, sisters, essentially finding out about them. And it's those, in fact, become primary source documents, and they teach students about multiple perspectives, as mom and dad or aunt and uncle might have very different stories about their childhood. So it's just a really, really nice fit, and shows that cross-content opportunity.
Yes, you're seeing social standards in that project, but you're an art teacher. So how does that connect to the art, the painting that those students are then doing?
So part of that, drawing from their own family knowledge, right, and the knowledge that exists in family homes. Like, for example, the father's occupation could be that of a mechanic, and so we use that as a form of capital in the classroom, and to develop an understanding of how our society works, right? If you see a history of working class occupations within your family, and these are the projects that students are doing, is that they're documenting, right, and they have primary resources where they see, right, these historical documents or even interviews of the history of their own family. And so if they continue to see a history of labor occupations within their own family, then they come to understand, why is it that we live in South Central, right? This is how our society works. This is why there are certain events that our government has, done to communities of color, right? That they come to understand why why these social circumstances exist, and how they work within their own communities. And
then how does that reflect in the art? Like, can you give an example of how that's been reflected in a project or something that they've created?
Right, and so I have I'm going to point to two examples that are in the back, and one of the things that students have to do as part of the California Art Content Standards is create a poster to a play or a theater or a movie that's coming out. And so one of the things that I have them do is I have them tell a narrative of an injustice that was committed to a particular community. And so, for example, what you see in the back is a reference to the Zoot Suit riots of 1943 and to the Rodney King beating that happened in 1992. And so one of the things that I do with the concept of surrealism is I teach...
The art concept.
Right, the art concept of surrealism is I give them a history lesson on how and what artists were doing within this art period of surrealism. And then I talk to them about how Sesame Street is an example of surrealism, because you have both living puppets and human beings living in the same community. And so then I introduce them to this concept of social surrealism, right? And so what does social surrealism looks like? And social surrealism identifies the issues that we have in our society, but it does it through the use of Sesame Street characters. And we put them in a real life situation in our real world, right? If Sesame Street characters were part of our world, what would happen to them because they were different, right? And so we replace them into these events, these unjust events of inequality, like the Zoot Suit riots, and what you see is Oscar the Grouch and Elmo being beat up by a bunch of sailors. And on the other poster you see Baby Bear being beat up by the police. Why? Because he's brown. And so that's kind of, you know, the issues of race, class, and gender that we unpack using their own knowledge of their own social circumstances, which came from learning about their parents' own working class occupations.
Mm-hmm. And then Guadalupe, you also are an ethnic studies teacher, and you've also found a way to integrate arts into your more English language arts, like social studies kind of centered class. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I currently teach English language arts, but I also have a couple periods where I do the ethnic studies as well. And so for me, it's always made sense. I'm a social studies credentialed teacher, and I also am an English language arts credentialed teacher. And so for me, the art element has always been a way of like sort of making the curriculum more alive, right? It makes it more 3D, 4D. And so currently, because I had the opportunity through my husband and through other folks in the community that I know to take students out to see plays, to work with playwrights, to work with actors, and then to come back into the classroom and have them write their own plays. So, you know, it really depends on the students that I have, the resources that I have, the support that I have. I'm not an actual artist myself. I'm more of like a facilitator of bringing people together. And so, you know, in the past, I've used, you know, my access to folklorico dancers or danzantes or, you know, visual artists, muralists, you know, musicians, whoever is, you know, in my circle that is willing and able to come in and help or to facilitate us going to them, we incorporate into our lessons. But furthermore, just using the resources like, you know, Center Theater Group or Los Angeles Theater Center. This year we went up north to San Juan Bautista and went to Teatro Campesino. Using whatever is around us to help bring that into whatever literature we're reading. You know, whatever, the same as Luis, we do a lot of sort of counter-narrative writing. So taking the themes in the novels that we're reading, and then using that as a springboard to then, you know, go back to families and talk to families and get those narratives and get them written, and then bringing in the art, either visual or poetry, music, dance, whatever it is that is speaking to the student themselves, and, you know, whoever I have available who is willing to help me at the time.
I want to talk more about the kind of more technical aspects of art and addressing history and social science standards. But first, we have a room of people here who came to listen and talk about ethnic studies. So I want to look out a little bit and see and talk to you and see if anyone here is maybe a teacher or has been a student of ethnic studies who has an experience that you think relates to the conversation that we're having up here. My colleague Daphne has a microphone. If you raise your hand, she can come to you.
Hi, my name is RJ Vasquez, and thank you all for coming here. I think it's a very positive program, and I want to thank you for your time. I had a Chicano Studies class when I was at Loyola Marymount University my freshman year, and it was taught by Dr. Gabriel Gutierrez. And in one of the classes, he grouped people in three. One group was the favored group, where he actually taught and paid attention to those people. The people who were kind of like mid-range cultural, he just gave a few books and said, discuss on your own. And the third group, which were essentially the white people, he essentially ignored and for that class. And it was interesting because about 20 years later, I got into I started working for a company where I was ignored. I came up with those sort of issues where I wasn't really being focused on, and they weren't paying attention to me. And it kind of clicked. And it was something that I was able to draw off of that, and it was very positive for me because I was able to cope with it better. It had nothing to do with my self-worth. It was this particular situation. But you know, I wonder, and it kind of raises the question for me, as positive as all of this is, I wonder if there are any cons to all of this, meaning is there a possibility of kind of creating some sort of victim mentality, or people always looking out that may have a chip on their shoulder? I wonder if there are any thoughts by the guests on that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm wondering, feel free to chime in with a response.
So with the counter narratives, whoever is in your classroom, they're going to be speaking with their families, right? They're going to be interviewing their families. So regardless of their background, I currently have white students in my classroom, and I've learned tons about where they come from. Like one of my students, because of tracking the immigration histories, I know that they're from Tennessee, and before that, grandparents from Scotland and other small countries in Europe. So, and we definitely promote uplifting him and his history because he wasn't very connected to it as well. So there, in absolutely no way is this about excluding, certain students. If I would say that's exactly the opposite of what ethnic studies is. And if anybody does that in ethnic studies, that would not be a part of the definition of it at all whatsoever. It's who you have in front of you, regardless of their race, regardless of their sexual orientation, their gender preference, any of those intersections. You love them and you give them 100%. And as far as like the victim mentality, I wouldn't say that we promote, victim mentality. I would say it's more about understanding the history and the systems so that you can then work towards undoing them. Not so that you can sit there and say, give me free. No, it's about working hard, going to college, hopefully, right? And in college, learning more about those systems so that you can come back and not just fill in those spaces with, people of color, but fill them in with a heart for all people and a heart for their community so that they can start working towards undoing some of those injustices in their communities. But absolutely never, ever, ever to come back and to do to others what was done to them. I would absolutely say no. That's not ethnic studies at all.
Luis or Kieley, do you have anything to add?
I'd like to ask if you could repeat the question again.
So I essentially asked, as positive as this program is, are there any maybe unintended consequences, maybe creating some sort of victim mentality or somebody that may have a chip on their shoulder after realizing and addressing some of the historical injustices that have been done?
Okay. So I'm going to answer that differently based on my approach to the arts, right, and my background in the arts. And so I draw heavily on this theory of the funds of knowledge, right? And I mentioned the funds of knowledge briefly, but the funds of knowledge are really the knowledge that exists in the homes of students, right, and bringing that into the classroom. And so one of the things that using the capital that the cultural capital that students have in their homes, right, it really makes their learning experiences relevant, right? It makes them relevant to their experiences. And one of the things that I want to make sure is that they're able to use that capital. And so I'm not really coming to them with this is what you have to learn about these other people. I'm really drawing on their knowledge to develop their own knowledge. And when it comes to drawing on ethnic studies or making culturally relevant knowledge, it's about I want to think of it as a reciprocal way of learning, right? Not only do I learn a lot more from my students, but I'm able to relate and figure out ways, as a professional educator, figure out ways of developing new lessons for them that are relevant to them so that they can understand their own larger society and their own experiences, and making sure that I connect those to their own communities. Otherwise, if I teach them about the primary colors in the classroom, but not teach them about how to use that in a mural out in their community, then what's the whole point? The learning that they're developing in the classroom is staying in the classroom, and it's not connecting to their own community. So my goal is to make sure that they're connecting their knowledge to their own spaces. And I honestly don't see how there would be a con to that, right? Is bring the knowledge that you have at home, let's learn with it in the classroom, and let's learn how to use it to improve our own communities.
Kieley, did you want to add anything?
Just very quickly, I just wanted to state that the goal really, from our perspective, is to make sure that we are very inclusive and that voices that may not have been heard prominently in the past are heard full-throated. And I think there's a nice reflection on that in the new History Social Science Framework for California Public Schools. It is as diverse and inclusive a document as I've seen, and I think that's what we are trying to ensure.
All right, we'll pivot to y'all for more questions and comments in a little bit, but I just want to follow up on this idea of cons. It was something I was planning on bringing up too. We've been talking about the benefits of ethnic studies, but there is also an amount of like resistance or criticism of the field of ethnic studies. Critics even on our own air or on our website have taken issue with a number of things. Some have said that ethnic studies courses seem like they have an agenda or are political. Some have said that if classes focus on kind of more certain ethnic groups, some students or teachers who don't identify with those groups may feel unwelcome or uncomfortable. In my reporting, I visited an ethnic studies classroom. I've been in a lot of arts classrooms. You can kind of see on the walls there's often art saying things like resistance or advocating for justice, reform, workers' rights. And so I just wanted to ask each of you kind of how you would respond to those criticisms of ethnic studies being in the classroom.
Well, we'll start with, there were many questions, so let me just jump into a couple of those. So one would be this question of advocacy, and it's really important, and again, I go back from that history social science perspective that I have, is that it calls for students to be asked a number of good historical questions and have multiple perspectives from which to draw on to answer those questions themselves. So we're not really promoting an advocacy, we're promoting the creation of critical thinkers, right? To the end that it may, we have a variety of different folks and a large, very diverse community in LAUSD, and one of the concerns we faced when dealing with the committee we put together to originally start looking at the course we were going to build and revising some of our others was that ethnic studies comes out of these 4 historically marginalized groups, and we looked at that and said, but LA Unified is far more than that.
Can you also just explain what those 4 groups are?
Absolutely. African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, and Native Americans. And absolutely true that they are historically marginalized, but we encompass a very diverse demographic in LA Unified. So when we wrote our ethnic studies survey course, we made sure that there were sections on those 4 historically marginalized groups, as well as a 5th unit that we called identity, to make sure that there was room for any one of our students who might not fall within one of those 4 groups.
Mm-hmm. And then Luis and Guadalupe.
Okay. I mean, I would say that any curriculum, whether it's stated overtly that it's political or not, is political. There are different perspectives on the purpose of education. So I would say that there's an agenda behind every curriculum and every curricular choice. Now, in terms of ethnic studies, I can't speak for all folks, but I would say that, someone who would have something like #resistance or something like that in their classrooms, I would say that makes sense. We live in a society that's still very homophobic, for instance. And so, you want to resist homophobia. You want to resist racism. You want to resist, abuse of workers and so on and so forth. And I would say that students who are coming definitely to, I'm sure Luis's classroom, my classroom, many LAUSD classrooms are coming from those backgrounds, the backgrounds of, working class parents. And so to not talk about the issues that are afflicting those communities would be a disservice. What would be the point really of educating them with knowledge that can't really be applied to their realities? So I would say, there is a political decision in my case and in many ethnic studies colleagues of mine to incorporate that, and not as an overt political agenda, because I absolutely never, ever, ever really promote any type of political agenda, but definitely to bring up those issues that have to do with class, that have to do with race, that have to do with oppression, not to have them, have a chip on their shoulder and to be very upset with the establishment, but to have them feel empowered to make changes in their communities through their education.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just gonna jump in for a second. I'm hearing like themes of critical thinking, multiple perspectives. Luis, I want to pivot back to you because we're here to talk about ethnic studies, those things, and the arts. So how does the arts versus, in comparison to an essay or a more traditional assignment, really lend itself to exploring that critical thinking that we're talking about?
Okay. If I steer off, bring me back to that question.
Okay.
But there's something that I wanted to say related to the previous question. And so one of the things that we need to understand is that there's inequality that exists in our society, right? Especially in our schools, right? We have upper middle class schools like Palisades High School, and we have marginalized communities like schools in South Central. And so how are we going to think about these two schools and say that at the end of their graduation that these students that graduate have an equal education, or that they have an equal opportunity to go to college? Okay, and so one of the things that I want my students to understand is that they are getting an unequal education compared to those in upper middle class communities. And so I want them to understand that, because I also want them to be ready for the inequality, the issues of race, the issues of class, issues of gender that they're going to experience in college and that they're experiencing in their own society right now. And so one of the things about art is I don't want to prepare students to be great artists. No, I'm using art so that they understand the inequality that exists in their society. And once they understand that this inequality exists in their society, and that once they understand that they're going to have to work 3 times, if not more times, much harder than someone from an upper middle class community, then they're going to understand and know how to navigate, right, their way through their college experience, right? And so the idea is I don't want to teach students to be great artists again. I want them to understand how society works through art. And so going back to your question, which was what again?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, to follow that, like, why art? Like, why do you think that is a way to connect to students? What is it about art that makes it, amenable to this? To
so I think art, so we have different types of learners, right? We have visual learners. We have learners that can do things just by reading. And then we have learners that are learned by, by being active in what they're doing. And so within my art projects, like these tortilla projects that you see in the back, students are actually, not only are they trying to understand how to challenge, right, these narratives. But
I'm going to stop you just for a second because we have images of tortillas that we can actually show as you talk about that. Okay,
so, for example, right, so the idea to challenge these narratives is it's not this project where they just paint something, right? They have to write about it, and they're assigned a 3-page, not a 3-page, a 5-paragraph essay talking about exactly how they're using a counter-narrative to challenge how the media has portrayed South Central. Because if you've seen movies about South Central, we know that all we see are gang members, drug deals, or drive-bys, right? And so the idea behind these tortillas is for students to challenge that narrative, right? It is to use not only the arts, but their understanding of social studies, right, by exploring these topics within ethnic studies and really using their own experiences to tell a different story about South Central. And so, it's not just the arts that I'm drawing from. I'm drawing from the English language arts. I'm drawing from California art standards, and I'm also drawing from social studies standards. And so, it's not just arts focused. And I think when we're developing lessons, we need to also draw from other subjects, because that's just going to expand the learning perspective of our students through other subjects. So if it works through ethnic studies, why not? If it works through English language arts, why not? Right? I'm not accredited I'm not credentialed in English, I'm not credentialed in social studies, but I'm still drawing from those standards, right? And so I think that's something that we need to strategically do in marginalized communities to really, meet the demands that these particular students in these communities need from us.
And just because you were talking about standards, we have Kieley here who comes from history, social science. Just to make this connection really explicit, what kinds of history, social science standards are you hearing in a project, an art-based project like the Tortilla Project?
Well, I was actually drawn, if you wouldn't mind, I was drawn to the posters in back on the surrealism about the Zoot Suit riots, which is a clear 11th grade standard in U.S. history. So there's our clear connections. If I could just draw back to your previous question, if you don't mind, I was just wanted to be really clear and that from the district perspective, there's a real opportunity here where maybe there are some of those negative voices or voices of concern, and that's an opportunity for us where we can make sure that we are providing proper and adequate professional development for our teachers who are going to be teaching these courses, and make sure that we're addressing both the content and the pedagogy, as I mentioned before, in the way that those courses should be addressed. And I think that we do create documents that help support our folks in the field.
And just speaking of professional development, we were talking earlier about how teachers in this field have really been sharing best practices with each other, lessons learned, tips. One of Luis's students has sent in a question kind of to that point. I'm wondering if you've had conversations among other teachers about this. The student asks, are there any assignments that you have given in your class, I think this goes for you too, Guadalupe, that have gotten sentimental responses, or any assignments that have had a sentimental response on you? So really getting, beyond just the standards or just the lesson that was being taught.
One of the lessons that talks to that is I do a lesson with my students where we look at Tupac's "The Rose That Grew from Concrete," right? And through this, for those of you that aren't familiar with Tupac's "The Rose That Grew from Concrete," he talks about the rose that grew from concrete as this resilient organism that's just, so resilient that it's growing through concrete. And so in this poem, he goes on to talk about the rose's damaged petals, right? Because it's not in a natural environment. It's in a toxic environment, but its resilience pushes it to grow. And so he talks about his damaged petals, and he talks about the concrete, right, as the circumstances that he's growing from. And so I have students analyze this poem first so that they understand that Tupac is talking about his experiences and about his emotional trauma as the scars, as the damaged petals. And then I have students do a remix of the rose that grew from concrete where they replace themselves as the rose.
So they write it themselves?
Right. So they talk about their damaged petals, right? And they talk about the concrete that they're growing out of. And so this is where students have just opened up to me about some of their most emotional and traumatic experiences. And so I'm not going to say that they openly do this with me, right? because they don't. They're writing it, and then I give them the choice of turning it in or not. But they all turn it in. And before I keep going, I do want to say that when I do that, I also put myself out in the open like that, right? I for lack of a better term, I what do they call it? I put my heart on my sleeves there. Right? I'm putting the trust in students, and I tell them my personal experiences. And I've gotten in tears as I tell my story, right? At least I did the first couple of times. And the students got up and applauded me. And so that enabled them to trust me with their own stories. And so, and I don't want to talk about a specific example that a student,
Sure.
Said to me, but I'll leave it at that. It opens opportunities of trust and those relationships to build.
And after that assignment, do you see a change in whether a student or in the class? Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you see an effect of that on the openness of conversation or?
Yeah, I mean, it develops relationships with the students. They understand that they can trust each other because there's students that want to volunteer to talk about these experiences, right? And they've held them inside for so long that this is the first time that they feel safe talking about these experiences, and the first time that they feel in a space of trust where they can share these experiences. And so after that, they feel they can talk about anything to anyone. And so not only do they build relationships themselves, but they take this mentality of helping each other out and supporting each other to other courses.
And that started with a creative-based project,
Right,
one that maybe
exactly.
on its surface would seem like one that would provoke those conversations. Guadalupe, do you have an example?
I'll just reiterate that we do want the students to feel vulnerable. We don't obviously want them to share everything because some things they need to remain private. But if they're vulnerable and their hearts are open, then they're more likely to grow and transform, right? And it shows in their art, it shows in their narratives, and we ourselves have to show that we're vulnerable and that we're willing to put ourselves out there. Otherwise, you set a sort of tone in the classroom that is still very guarded. And so in my class, I mean, I'm a crybaby, so we're constantly crying through the literature that we read. And very recently, I had the August Wilson in school residency teaching artist in my classroom.
The monologue?
It's the monologue competition is something separate, and the students do get to go witness that. But we have 2 teaching artists that would come weekly into the classroom and lead the students to a culminating project that has to do with August Wilson's plays, specifically how it relates to them. And so what I do is I'm there sort of as a co-facilitator with the teachers, but I'm also a student. So I go in there and I answer the questions with them. And so one particular time they had us, traveling around the room and then stopping and asking each other questions. And it had to do with where are you going and what are you leaving behind? And then there was just a point after you met with 3 random people in the classroom that you stop and sit down, and they gave us these more in-depth questions that are related to some of the August Wilson plays, which are very powerful and very meaningful. And what I found was this student who's very, she's an athlete, she's very guarded, she's very humble, but just very, she doesn't really show too many emotions. And she started sharing some really amazing family history with me that were very near and dear to her heart, having to do with her family. And I knew that, I was getting goosebumps. I could tell that she was very affected by sharing. But when I really realized that this had a positive impact on her and pushed her forward in her culminating project was when another teacher came to me who has known her longer, has known her, since middle school, and shared with me, like, Miss, I'm not very emotional. I got really emotional today, and
Wow.
shared, what she had gone through in the classroom.
And I'm going to stick with you for a second because, everyone here has kind of shared, an outcome of arts in ethnic studies. And you know, you've been an advocate and are continuing to advocate for ethnic studies in California classrooms. Is the call for arts something that's part of that call for ethnic studies? How is the arts related to that advocacy?
Absolutely. Definitely an advocate for art in general, all of the arts, the performing arts, visual arts, all arts in general for students. It's transformative, right? I know many people whose lives have completely transformed due to, you know, the art of their choice, the art of their passion. I'm definitely an advocate for the arts in all the curriculum, specifically in ethnic studies. I believe that it should be incorporated in English language arts, in social studies-based ethnic studies, and in those courses in general. I can see, I'm kind of the opposite of Luis, where he does the art and has them write about it. I have students write and then create art to go with it, just because for me, that's the lens that makes sense to me and how I can facilitate. So absolutely 100% a proponent of the arts in all students' lives.
I just want to pivot to Kieley for a second because, you know, AB 2772 is, you know, advocating for a graduation requirement that would be in English or social studies. Do you see a future for arts as part of that if it were, however LAUSD implements it, whether it's part of that requirement as required by law? How do the arts play into that if it's not explicitly stated?
As I mentioned before, we envision or would hope that regardless of what action the state takes, that we would like to see ethnic studies embedded across content K-12. And that obviously does include the arts. So that's our perspective on how we would like to see this happen.
And then I want to do a little forward-looking at this point. So, like as Kieley mentioned, we don't quite know what's going to happen with that bill. But I do want to talk about the idea of if ethnic studies are not, you know, required per se, how those lessons can be implemented across curriculum, how you see those happening. And any of you, like even if it's not, like we don't know what's going to happen to that bill. There have been bills that have been introduced before to require them.
I just wanted to let you know that as I mentioned before, in the last 2 years, we had over 11,000 students go through one or more of the courses just that fall under the social sciences. We've recently gone through textbook adoption in the state of California for history, social science. It's the first time since 2006, and our textbook orders are very significant, and that those orders are based upon projected master schedules for next year. So we are looking next year at well over 100 of our high schools that will be offering one or more of our ethnic studies courses. So regardless of what the state does, we are seeing exponential growth in our district, and that's what we've been hopeful for, that it would happen in an organic fashion, and that when and if the state does act, that we are well positioned, and we feel that we're well ahead of where the state is. So we're very positive about the growth of ethnic studies in our district.
And are you all seeing that too in enrollment in your, I mean, it's required in your district, but for your Painting Through Cultural Perspectives class?
No, absolutely. I think one of the things that happens within this class, right, is that students, by word of mouth, start talking about, oh, Garcia does ethnic studies, right, but he uses the arts as well. And, you know, not only am I thinking about it within the K through 12 system, right, because once, I mean, even before, right, even before, right, this implementation of ethnic studies was present, there was a collaboration, right, between socially conscious teachers to develop lessons that were interdisciplinary. And so one of the things that I had done for the past 2 years was collaborate with the ethnic studies teacher. And so I luckily have a huge classroom, maybe the size of this theater, and it comes with no sink, though. That's the hard part.
Neither does this theater.
But we were able to fit 2 classes in there, and we talked about, you know, how different cultures celebrate Dia de los Muertos. And so you have the Mexican traditional one. We talked about the way they celebrated in Guatemala with the kites, and we talked about how it's celebrated in Japanese lantern in Japan with Japanese lanterns, right? And so, you know, I'm thinking collaborations, and not only with other subjects, but one of the things that I've also done with the tortillas is I reached out to Cal State LA professor Enrique Ochoa, whose own research is on maíz. And so he comes in, like what we did the first year. He came into my class and he gave students a lecture on the history of the tortilla from its indigenous origins to how companies like Misión and Guerrero market their tortillas as non-GMO, gluten-free, right? And what we did this year is he came in again to my class, but then he asked me to go to his class. And so there was a collaboration, you call it an exchange, right, of lecturers. And so what this culminated to is a tortilla exhibit between a collaborative exhibit of tortillas done by Cal State LA students and Nava students. And it's happening sometime soon, but the idea is to bring these two groups together, so where they're going to share and talk about their own narratives. And so, right, as we're talking about implementing ethnic studies, we need to expand this, what else we can do also. And then just to touch on this a bit, we need to think about teacher education as well.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, collaboration with other teachers on campuses, because K through 12 is a must. We must, if it's not a graduation requirement or a specific standalone course, all of the curriculum should be culturally relevant to the community, to the students in the classrooms. And if you yourself are not equipped to do that, then, call upon colleagues, call upon people in the community, call upon artists that are experts, like the Maíz Enrique Ochoa at Cal State LA. I know, like for me, I've had at least 12 or 13 people come into my classroom this year to help with painting, to help with dance choreography.
So like teaching artists?
Teaching artists, yeah, friends or specific teaching artists that come through like Center Theater Group. But like recently, as like last week, I had Lori Muniz Jaimez come in, who helped the students with the Zutsu, like a Pachuco style choreography dance piece.
Is that the photo that we have?
That's
in the
one
back?
of the photos
Okay.
that's back there. And so the students got to perform that for the community, and we collaborated with the history teacher who had students do newsreels of the same period, and another teacher who had students do research on certain topics of the time. So all of these things were being displayed at the same time. So we're not alone. We have to go out there and find folks that can help us with these things. Some of the plays that students have written, we've called upon teachers that are, experts in music or in lighting or in prop design. We need to work as a tribe. Like, we're not all experts on everything, but if we pull everyone together, we can do a great job with these students.
I think this is a good point for us to pivot back to our audience. I'm done asking questions for a little bit. I encourage you to raise your hands, and we'll run a mic to you and have our panelists respond.
Hi, my name is Jesus Martinez. I'm also an art teacher. First off, I want to applaud you and commend you for the work you guys are doing. I think it's an amazing thing that you guys are doing for our students of color and students of different ethnic backgrounds. And part of the reason why I'm excited about being here and I'm excited about listening to what you guys have to say is because as a teacher, I've come across many students who don't know their own histories, who don't know, what their family origins are like, and they can't communicate that part, and they should be able to. And the fact of the matter is that there's many reasons why. There's reasons because society today doesn't allow Latino parents or African American parents to sit down and have those traditional conversations with their kids because they're too busy working two jobs. They're or their kids just want to watch TV. Those traditional values and morals aren't there anymore. And so on another note, I want to say that if ethnic studies is going to come into the curriculum, it should be a mandatory curriculum, not an elective. And on top of that, it should be all across the board, because if only the marginalized groups are taking the ethnic studies classes, yeah, we're going to keep roaring, we're going to keep telling our stories and talking to people about our struggles, but if the other groups don't know anything about these struggles, we're just going to keep yelling, and they're not going to know. They're not going to feel our struggle. They're not going to feel the struggles of minority students who are in schools that are not equal, right? Who are not sharing the allocated budgets equally. Mm-hmm. And so I am for making this a mandatory. Like the school you mentioned, Palisades, they should have an ethnic studies course, so they understand what's going on in marginalized communities, like in South Central where I work. Definitely needs to happen. And thank you again. Any response?
Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you for those comments. So, okay, a couple things. So one, yeah, you're right. Like, students of color need to start talking with families, so it needs to be facilitated. If we can facilitate that process to end the cycle of shame, right? A lot of times we're very ashamed. Everything in the media, like of South Central, shows all of these negative images. So a lot of times students are embarrassed, right? Because pop culture shows a certain thing as what is glamorous. So we need to show that that's not reality, this is reality. Be proud of it, but at the same time, be critical and be willing to make changes, right? That's one of the things that we talk about a lot, is that you can't keep doing the same thing and expect different results, right? And so, that's part of it. So, yeah, absolutely, we need to start promoting more, communication, family stories, and all of that, which is why we do the counter narratives. And then the other, there was something else I was going to say. What was the other part that you were saying? The ethnic studies courses for all students, mandatory? I was going to speak to that. Thank you. That's what I was going to say. All backgrounds. That's exactly it. The research shows that actually white students who take ethnic studies courses benefit greater than students of color. So across the board. And there is research. You can look, Christine Sleater, a lot of her research has proven that. So you're right. It's good for all students. What the research also shows is that white students oftentimes know more about people of color and their histories than the people of color themselves. So you're right. It needs to be for everyone, everywhere. So thank you.
We'll go to another question, if anyone has one.
Yes, I have a question. Daniel Solorzano, UCLA professor. Where I thought this was going across the board with your question was, do you see a point where through the A through G requirements, that ethnic studies could be in every one of those requirements? Because often we think of the humanities, we think of social sciences, language arts, but we don't think of math in the sciences. And I think we can envision what an ethnic studies course would look like in mathematics sciences and with the biological sciences, the chemical science, et cetera.
So I know you were my professor, by the way, at UCLA. So it's exciting to see you there. I didn't see you at first. But anyway, so yeah, absolutely. The A through G, so there are a couple ways to do that. And one of the ways is, so an A course is a social studies course, right? So to create courses that qualify as, the 10th grade world history, but have that ethnic lens. So you can build that in and get them UCOP approved. So that would be great to do that for all of the, A through G, right? So it would be in the math. So I would say that we need to promote our students and that pipeline to get them through. So they're not just going into the sciences. We want to get them into the sciences because we're not sending enough to the sciences, right? But to get them there with that ethnic studies lens so that when they come back, that they will be able to facilitate that great science learning with a very culturally relevant lens. And I know for us as the grassroots organization that I work with, the Association of Raza Educators, we're always putting a call out there for folks who are math-oriented, science-oriented to be able to come and join us. Oftentimes, though, we get more of the arts, we get the English, the history, because it's kind of like, it lends itself very comfortably to that, but definitely I think that we need to start promoting, integrating it into the other, of the A through G areas.
We have another question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tristan Espinoza. I have more of a comment, less of a question, partly in response to the last question and also just kind of speaking to my experiences. So I'm actually a recent transplant from Chicago. I went to an arts university there, and I just recently moved back to California. And I think that this entire conversation is extremely relevant because when I think about ethnic studies, I think it's really important to talk about how I never thought about my Filipino-American identity until I started making art. And that was because in art school, when you're making art, it's a lot of self-reflection, right? You have to pivot into your own stories. You have to really extract those narratives to be able to make things that are compelling. But my background is really unusual because I make art through code, right? So I do a lot of there's a lot of science and mathematical background behind.
Okay.
Yeah, because so I got into it through like game design, so learning how to script, making video games. I got into kind of like a Filipino-American art show where they were like asking you to make work about your art, and so okay, like I'll make a video game about what my story is, and eventually it's kind of pivoting into more creative coding stuff, and so I kind of wanted to highlight that there are ways to integrate the arts and sciences together in ways that aren't so, I don't know, I guess disparate and dissonant. Like if you were like a data viz major or something, then there are ways to kind of collect data and highlight things and make things that are compelling and engaging to interact with as a marginalized community.
That's
right?
interesting because I feel like a big thing, I cover arts education, and a big thing, a buzzword almost you can say in the field is the idea of STEAM education, right? You integrating the arts alongside science, technology, mathematics. So it's interesting. Thank you for sharing kind of that idea of bringing in identity into STEAM. I don't know what the acronym would be there, but as identity is part of the art, yeah, you can work on that. Identity is part of the arts aspect of that, I think is really interesting. Thank you so much. Do we have another question in the audience?
Hi, my name is Leslie Quinteros. I am a LAUSD graduate. I also teach in South Central and currently live and have been living in South Central for a while. One of my questions is, if, let's say, this law to make sure that all schools teach ethnic studies or that's part of the curriculum does not pass, is there conversations about going to the ed training programs and starting it there, because there is a lot of teachers that don't feel prepared to come into these communities and teach about something that they don't, an experience that they have not lived. And is like maybe LAUSD, is that something that they do right off the bat as they're introducing these teachers into these communities?
Yeah, I'm going to aim that question towards Kieley because it's something that we've talked about in LAUSD's resolution to implement ethnic studies.
Absolutely. We do have an online professional development course that we initiated when we rolled out the Ethnic Studies Survey course. It's a 6-hour online professional development that we asked teachers who were teaching ethnic studies courses to go ahead and go through. And it is less content specific than it is, and it's more about the idea of how to handle what we sometimes refer to as hot topics in the classroom. So it incorporates some management skills, or how to handle controversial issues and make sure that all voices in the classroom are heard and feel that they can be heard within that space. We are talking about, I work with another group of teachers, our Ethnic Studies leadership team. It's made up of current Ethnic Studies teachers in LAUSD from across all of our local districts, and we're talking about moving forward into next year and perhaps doing some professional development that is more content specific for our existing courses that we could make available to our teachers. So yes, it is it's a conversation that we've had, and it is an ongoing conversation, and we absolutely are working in that direction.
What is the example of a content specific kind of?
By that I mean that it would be more geared to one of our existing courses. So if a teacher perhaps did not have a background and they were assigned a content background in African American history, and yet that was a course that had been assigned to them or they were going to teach, that we would have content specific to that course.
Like the material that would be covered.
Correct.
Got it.
Something else that I wanted to mention is, yeah, the district could provide, professional development, I want to say this the way it is because sometimes the professional development that's provided by the district isn't enough. And so part of my own development and Guadalupe's development, I think is our involvement in teacher education support groups. So one of the things that's helped me a lot is being part of these social justice education groups, where we're getting together with other teachers that teach other subjects, and we're addressing issues of inequity, we're addressing issues of culturally relevant lessons in our classrooms. And so these perspectives, not only are we learning from other teachers' perspectives, but they're learning from our own perspectives as well. And so I think in addition to the district support, what we're going to need to continue to do is to continue to develop with other like-minded educators. And I think I'll talk to that's something that's really worked for me.
And just to ask a question about that, I mean, like, is that these groups of teachers, are they social studies teachers, English language arts teachers? Are they across, different subject areas?
Definitely across subject areas and across, different intersections. So it is very important to have those networks, because there are a lot of folks that are doing really good work out there. And the beautiful thing about today with social media and how everybody just got closer to one another is that you can come together and share those resources. Online course is just not enough. Like, you really have to, it's really more about the pedagogy than it is about the content, because we're all educated folks. We can learn more. We've learned how to learn. We've learned all of these things, but it's really about how to interact with the students and how to make that learning accessible in a way that promotes the ideals that we are trying to promote in society, which is, to treat one another with respect, to have respect for all, to be fair, to be just. And you can't just teach a content about it. You can't just say, be fair, and these people were treated unfairly. You have to put yourself out there. You have to be vulnerable. You have to allow their stories to come in and for them to share instances where they felt as if they weren't treated fairly. And sometimes, we mess up, and we have to be able to say, I'm sorry, I acted in such a way and I made you feel in such a way, and I'm going to reflect on that. And to model that. And so the pedagogy is very important, and folks that are doing that work already in the community coming together is key. And I know that there are a lot of grassroots professional developments. Like, I know, like, the Institute of Teachers of Color is amazing. I've been, I've participated in that before, and that has really helped me to reflect on my own self and then to be a better facilitator of this type of learning. So I would definitely say to use that as professional development. Use other educators who are volunteering their time to do the work.
Do we have another question out here?
Yes, Dave Gutman, retired engineer and former math teacher. My question, my kids went to elementary in LAUSD, and the only arts education they got was through parent volunteers, Art to Grow On programs. So I'm wondering what has been done to bring arts into the elementary level, and I really do believe STEAM education is important to balance out the creativity and get the engineering and math and science technology together. So I guess this is to Kieley.
To be honest with you, my background is history, social science, but I do know there's been a large push and additional funding for arts education, and I believe that every elementary school now has access to an arts program. I can't speak to whether or not that is a full-time dedicated person at each school, but certainly that there's somebody there for an allotted period of time throughout the instructional year. So that much I do know.
And okay, so I think there's a couple of things that I would say off of my own experiences. Number one of the things that I've tried to do with my students, right, to bring arts into local elementaries is we have a mural project a culminating mural project that we have at the end of the course. So one of the things that I have them do is I introduce them to the idea of submitting an application to a proposal. And so the assignment is a proposal that I typed up and saying, you and your group of artists are submitting a proposal to this local community. And so what would it be and why? And so they actually submit that proposal to 3 local elementaries, and depending on who responds, 1 could respond or 2 could respond. Now they have community projects that they can do. And one of the things that I did last year was exactly that. We did 2 murals in 1 elementary within a mile radius from the high school. In terms of what they're doing at the elementary level to bring more arts into the classroom, I understand that a lot of elementaries have been, cut short within the arts. And so I know that they're bringing in teaching artists from museums, right? Which to me is something that I critique a lot, because it's teaching artists that may not have a background in the same community that they're going to do these art projects or art activities. And number 2, they might be coming in with this museum curriculum, which students may not have access to. And we know that museums have constantly marginalized communities of color from, they're very alienating spaces. And so that's just something that I kind of wanted to comment.
So once again, we have a teacher here who has done the footwork to do the collaboration to then bring the arts across, what is it, what do they call that, horizontally? No, vertically, right? Vertically teaching across the curriculum, so good work.
And arts education is something that I cover here at the station, so I'd love to connect afterwards and point you to some resources and studies that have been done about access to arts, specifically in elementary schools and across LA County. Do we have any other questions?
Hi. My name is Tahireh Shirazi, and I work at one of the LAUSD schools as a garden teacher. I don't work for LAUSD. I work for a nonprofit called Enrich LA. And something that I'm not a sociologist or a historian or an artist or a scientist. I'm none of the things that you're talking about. But I pretty much cover all of these areas, particularly ethnic studies, because I talk about the ethnicity of food, what soil is, and how you treat the land, what you grow on this land, how you eat it, how you share it, and all of that comes from very, very different backgrounds. The culture of food, the culture of agriculture, and the respect of the land on which we live. I start my classes pretty much all of September. We spend almost a month and a half talking about the names of every student that comes to my class. I teach 9 classes a week, and each class is about 25 or 30 strong, and each one of these students has to know where their name came from, and that leads them to their culture and sharing each other's cultures. And every single month of the year, there is something very specific to the culture of some part of this world, and it's just a very comprehensive way of teaching STEAM and everything else that you're teaching in a classroom. And I would highly recommend you, those of you who work for LAUSD, to promote a school garden program, not just to bring food to the table and not just to teach them how to eat healthy, but teach them how to respect each other, respect the land, and basically be able to bring those books into the real life, which is the land.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. I think we have time for one more question. I have one here.
Hi, my name is Francisco Suarez. I'm an attorney in Claremont, and I wanted to just congratulate the LA Unified School District for trying to inculcate ethnic studies. I don't know if people understand this, but the ethnic studies in Tucson, Arizona was banned. And they just had a decision about a year and a half ago in which the judges were fantastic as far as being able to pinpoint all the discrimination was going on due to the fact that they were trying to get rid of ethnic studies. And again, I think that you guys have to be congratulated on bringing this up and being in the 21st century. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
Maybe one more question?
I don't have a question. I just want to share a personal story. Thank you. I started school at a community college because there wasn't money to send me to a state university. And one semester they brought in a visiting professor from the state university. And I signed up for Sociology 1A, but he started teaching a Chicano Studies class. He got permission, and so they told us right up front this is going to be a focus on Chicano Studies, so technically ethnic studies, but we were going to get credit for Sociology 1A. And I have to say, after that class, I was like, oh my God, this is about me and my people and curanderas, and I aced the class because I could relate to it. And I thought, God, it must be wonderful for the white kids. Sorry. It must be wonderful for the white kids who all these 12 years of education could relate to everything that they were reading about in their books. And now I was able to relate to what we were studying in class. And so ethnic studies, just invaluable. And the other thing is, when I was in high school, we read all this poetry, Chaucer, which I couldn't relate to at all, but we studied it and had to practice reading some of the lines in Old English. So I hated poetry. But when I read Yo Soy Chicano, oh my God. I said, okay, I like poetry because it's about me. So ethnic studies is just...
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your perspective. I think I want to close with a question that we got submitted from a student to really wrap up this conversation about ethnic studies and arts. And the student asks, why have you decided on art? Why not have students write about their opinions through an English class or in another class? Why has art spoken to you more than other classes? Luis or Guadalupe?
Well, I do a lot of reading and writing, and then the art is like the supplemental. So absolutely, like writing, a lot of the big ahas come from reading other people's stories. And so there's a lot of that goes on in the classroom.
And Luis, get the final word.
So drawing from art is my primary, approach to learning. But one of the things that I think I mentioned it earlier is that we need to draw from other subjects because that's just going to expand the learning horizons of, compared to a one subject tract, right? If we're learning and developing through art, that's fine. But why not expand on this idea or concept or creativity that you're doing by writing about it? So not only are you engaging it, not only are you transferring your thoughts onto a visual representation, but now you're expanding on this visual representation by writing a three paragraph reflection on what you did and your process, what you learned, what you didn't learn. And number three, what you're doing, what you were explaining right now, when it's related or where it's relevant to your own experiences, right? Not only are you learning about this experience creatively, but you're also doing it as you're reflecting, writing, and continue to kind of reflect on that experience. And so it really brings it full circle, right? Because we're drawing from our own knowledge, from the knowledge that exists in our communities, from the knowledge that exists in our homes, and we're using it to create, and we're using it to write, and it's just, expanding it more than what it originally intended to.
I feel like that's a good point to end on. So I would like to take a moment to thank our guests. Kieley Jackson, Dr. Luis-Genaro Garcia, and Guadalupe Cardona, and also to thank the in-person team for bringing us together tonight. I'm also very grateful for all of you who came to engage in this conversation with us. We're going to hang here over by the stage or maybe by the art for a couple minutes after if you want to talk one-on-one or follow up with a question that you didn't get to ask. But I hope you'll join us at KPCC again, either on air, online, or in person like this, and have a good night.